So I introduced everyone here. Today, we're going to be doing a little bit of a conversation slash creative storytelling piece that Fernando has prepared for us. And I just wanted to set out originally that the context of this piece was for an initiative at Accenture, and it's based off of a TV show called One Day at a Time. It's an American sitcom based off of a 1975 series of the same title. And I won't spoil anything else because that's obviously Fernando's pleasure. Fernando is also a member of the leadership team of the PRIDE Employee Resource Group at Accenture. He's also joining us today from Accenture. So thank you for taking such time out of your day, out of your busy schedule to be with us. And before I spoil anything else, I'll let you introduce your talk.
Yeah, thank you so much. By the way, I'm not wearing this lanyard just because I'm part of the PRIDE ERG. This is actually where I carry my badge. So I have it all the time, not just for the event. But thank you, Charles. I know all of you at this point have at least heard of One Day at a Time, even if you don't really know what it is, but because it was on the flyer for this event. But for those who might not know what it is, today I want to introduce you to this amazing Emmy-nominated sitcom, and to talk about how I connected to the show so much through my own intersectionality, as well as why I think it's a groundbreaking representation of Hispanic culture in media. So to jump right in, One Day at a Time is a sitcom about a Cuban-American family living in LA, and it focuses on the day-to-day life of a single mom, her two kids, and her mom, and her mother, so the grandma. It is actually, like Charles said, a reimagined take of another show that had the same name from 1975. But this one tackles issues like mental health, mental illness, immigration, sexism, homophobia, gender identity, and racism that Latin and Hispanic people living in the United States face every day. And that last sentence is the first of many reasons that I love the show so much. As a cis gay man from Puerto Rico, but living in the diaspora, I see some parts of myself in many of those topics. However, I want to focus on three of those areas today, starting with my Puerto Rican identity. Living in the diaspora was the first way that I related to the family on the show, because as I mentioned, they do too, they live in LA. And sure, they're Cuban, I'm Puerto Rican, but Cuban culture is very similar to Puerto Rican culture. There's actually this famous verse from a poem by author Lola Rodriguez de Tio that says, Cuba y Puerto Rico son de un pájaro las dos alas. Cuba and Puerto Rico are the two wings of the same bird. So I sometimes see myself, my family, my friends reflected in these characters, in the phrases they use, in the food they eat, like even something as simple as having rice and beans all the time and pork being the go-to dish during the holidays. And their music, especially salsa music, which brings up a debate on its own of its Puerto Rican origins versus Cuban origins, but that's a different conversation. But yeah, it makes me feel a little closer to home every time I watch it. And funnily enough, 3 out of the 4 main actors are not actually Cuban in real life, they're Puerto Rican. Among them, Academy Award winner Rita Moreno. So that definitely strengthens the connection even more. Now, I mentioned that part of my intersectionality is my identity as a cis gay man. In the show, and spoiler alert, the eldest daughter is also gay. Her name is Elena. The show takes us through Elena's journey of realization, acceptance, and finally coming out to her family. And that stuck with me when I first saw it, because although my identity journey is very different from hers, I had never seen a coming out story that involved a Hispanic family on TV. And that made all the difference to me, because it reminded me of my own coming out story with my parents, how my dad was surprised but supportive, my mom not so surprised but crying because she was worried for me and it would take longer for her to process. Elena's coming out scenes were the closest thing to my experience that I had seen acted out at the time. And they somehow helped me understand more closely where the reactions of people around me came from, even after all those years, and the impact that cultural identity can have on situations like that, like coming out. And coming out in itself is hard because every time we face a possibility of rejection. And also, we don't only come out one time. I wish it was that easy. We come out again and again to different people in different situations and to different reactions. For example, I came out for the first time in 2007 to my best friend, who's now one of my roommates. And since then, I've had to come out to my family, to friends, to colleagues, to people I don't know in person, like in different events like these. And some of these moments have been harder than others, definitely. But I would say that in general, I feel like it gets easier and less relevant with time, as well as as you become more confident with yourself and find a space where you feel safe. Still, when I think about it, it is kind of strange to think that I'll probably have to keep coming out for the rest of my life, while my straight peers don't. So there is something to think about. However, there's also the concept of chosen family in the show. This one, I connect both to my gay identity and my Hispanic identity, but in different ways that I'll explain in a moment. So I've heard this term more and more throughout the years, and I know it's not unique to the LGBTQ community, but at some point I realized that it's more common within our community because a lot of people have faced rejection from their biological families and eventually find people, if they're lucky enough, that become their chosen family. I'm lucky enough to have both, but I admit it sometimes clashes with the Hispanic aspect of my identity because in Hispanic culture, family is blood, family is biological family, and that tends to be the main priority. However, my experience has been that although I love and I'm close to my immediate family and some of my extended relatives, I tend to hold my chosen family at the same level, and in specific circumstances, I feel even closer to them because through their own intersectionalities and identities, some of their life experiences have been closer to mine than that of my biological family. In the show, however, this is captured a little bit differently, which was pretty interesting for me because they do portray the concept of family first based on Hispanic culture. But in this case, they add a chosen family member as the show goes on. And he's actually their in-building landlord who's not Cuban at all. He's Canadian. But he becomes closer and closer to the family throughout the show and becomes an integral part of that unit. And last but not least, I want to talk about one of the most important concepts that I connect to in the show, and that's how they portray mental health. Especially the mom's struggles with admitting that she had PTSD and she needed help, with agreeing and feeling ashamed of taking medication, and with sharing this with her family eventually, and how that process kept going after that. Sadly, I think it's very common in Hispanic culture to dismiss mental health issues and the help that's available. There's this kind of stigma around it based on shame and weakness. And in my case, I've been kind of forced to challenge that notion from a very young age because my mom has had a lot of mental health struggles that I consequently have had to help address, and that have obviously caused strain on me as well. When I was younger, sometimes it felt like I couldn't talk to anyone about it outside of my close family circle, and it felt very isolating sometimes. I sometimes joke with my friends that I'm a master of compartmentalization. That word is kind of hard to say. But for real, that was what I had to do in certain moments in order to protect myself and be able to keep going, depending on the situation. Later in college, though, I realized that it wasn't just happening to me and my family, and I started sharing with friends. And it's been a long journey and a lot of therapy, but I know now that it's good to talk about these situations to normalize them, and so people don't feel so isolated when they're going through any sort of mental health situation with themselves or with their family or someone close to them. And as I mentioned, getting a therapist helped a lot, and now I think everybody should have a therapist. But it definitely took time to get there. To realize that we are all going through stuff, not just me, and that there's no shame in admitting when we need help. And just to close, kind of thankfully, I think that the eyes and minds in general of the world are opening when it comes to mental health, not just in Hispanic culture, but everywhere. These past 2 years have definitely taken a toll on everyone, and we've all reached our limits, and we've all had to accept it and cope in our own ways. And I know that the struggles and circumstances of everyone on this call might be different, but I usually strive to always be as positive as possible. So to end, I'm confident that we can keep growing, connecting with ourselves and each other, and that we can work through anything if we just take it one day at a time. So thank you.
Thank you, Fernando, for sharing with us. I really appreciate it. I apologize for just there we go, the virtual rounds of applause that are going around. It's such an amazing conversation, and it's such an important one. And I just am so grateful that you're willing to share with us, particularly because, as we all understand, representation in media is incredibly important, and there's just not enough of it. There's not enough of it for LGBT people. There's not enough of it for people of different races, ethnicities, cultures, backgrounds. I mean, name an intersection, and it's probably not there. And if it is, it's usually infantilized or some type of almost ad hoc comedian character of that type of community. And so it's really disappointing. But what I find so incredible about this show, and I'm gonna turn it over to you in a second, is just that we can take these stories, like One Day at a Time was a 1975 story about a white family, I think in San Francisco, I'm pretty sure.
Something, I think so, yeah.
And it's just like these stories, human stories, are universal, and being able to tell them from different vantages and different intersections is incredibly important, because seeing yourself in media is so important. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how you think the show did it well. Like, obviously we heard your personal preferences on the show, but what makes this show special from the way that other media representations of culture have done so in the past?
That's a very good question. And the first thing that pops into my mind is they didn't try to make the characters perfect. On the contrary, they wrote out the characters and their stories and the scripts in a way that it's just very relatable, even in the small things. Like the mom, for example, and I mentioned that she has PTSD. Just the journey and the character development from season 1 to I think there's 4 seasons, but only 3 are on Netflix. So from season 1, let's say, at least to even to the end of season 2, let's say, her development and her growth with her mental health is shown in a way that it's not like, oh yeah, she did one thing and now she's cured or better. No, she goes up, she goes down, she has her ups and downs during her journey. Some days she's good, she mentions it, sometimes casually, sometimes it's like really heavy. So I don't know, in general, I feel like they made the characters just real. And that's one of the things that sometimes in a show, and I mean, this is a sitcom, so there's definitely, jokes and things that you would expect. But even though that part, the comedy part, sometimes is predictable, the way that the characters react sometimes just always caught me like, oh wow, like this is cool, like this reminds me of X experience of mine, or I've seen that in friends, or I've seen that in family. I don't know, it just made me feel very familiar every time I watch it. Actually, when I originally wrote that little piece a few months ago, I started rewatching it again, and it was a great experience. Honestly, I knew the storyline, but it had been a little bit since I had watched it the last time. So it was just watching every episode, even the episodes that are meant to be sad, that can make you cry. It was still just a very satisfying experience. That's the way I can describe it.
Yeah,
did I answer the question?
You did. I mean, there's no good way to answer that. And, because of course we're talking about a sitcom, and the first thing that came to my mind almost immediately was like, oh, of course a sitcom, which has time and like character development and the ability to really like tell a story over a long period of time, can do something like this. Because when you get to the movie level, or like these other representations that you often see of mental illness, and particularly LGBT topics, I mean, it's got to be epic, it's got to be sad, tragic, and quick, which ends up making the storyline so familiar and repetitive and almost derogatory every single time. Like one story was enough, but why do we have to keep telling us that the entire community looks in one way? So I think a sitcom is a really brilliant format that enables you to have that long adventure in a way that you possibly don't maybe in other forms of media, which I thought was not something I thought of before you were speaking.
Yeah. And just to add something quick that came to mind as you were speaking, the way I like that they presented certain, let's say, stereotypical characters in different ways. For example, or not stereotypical characters, but topics that are very popular in media. Like there's always a gay character in whatever, but it's usually a gay man. a gay cis man. So they didn't do that. They could have had the son be the gay one. But no, it's the daughter, the eldest daughter, who like is like super smart in school, and she comes out as a lesbian, and she has a gender non-conforming partner at some point in the show. Like, and I don't want to spoil everything. I get excited talking about it, but it's the way that they took, okay, yeah, we want to include this part of an identity, but how can we do that in a way that hasn't been like thoroughly exploited in the media?
You know, one thing that's sort of interesting about this is that, so this is based on the remake of a Norman Lear show. And this idea of showing the human behind the stereotype is very much in Norman Lear's wheelhouse. But what's interesting is how far we've come, so that even that which was groundbreaking at its time, we can look back and see how still stereotypical, how still minimizing a lot of that show was, even though for the time it was incredible. And it makes me wonder about the things that we see now and what kind of strides we're going to make, you know, in future. Well, people will look back and say, I can't believe that was acceptable, and they'll be right, you know?
Yep. Yeah, that's a very good point.
If I might add, I'm the only one here who was alive before you guys were born. There were shows called All in the Family. I don't know if you've heard of.
Also a Norman Lear show.
And some other spin-offs, which Norman Lear did, which speaks exactly to what you talked about. I saw one day at a time on whatever the streaming channel it was. And I thought it was great. I really loved it. And I didn't know there was a remake. So I tuned in a little late, or maybe I'm just not tuned in, I don't know. But I'm wondering where and when can we see the current one? And Fernando, are you in it?
I'm not in it. I really like the show. I've watched it all the way through probably like 3 times. The show is the first 2 seasons are on Netflix, and the 3rd one is on, I think it's now Paramount Plus. It used to be on Pop TV, but I think it's Paramount Plus. But the first 2 seasons you can find on Netflix.
So those were the 2 I would have seen. So I'd like to see season 3. I look for Paramount Plus or
yeah, it used to be on the Pop TV website, but I have a memory that my friend had told me the other day that they moved it to Paramount Plus. I guess streaming rights and all that.
Mitchell,
I can try to find it, and
you can get a month free of Paramount Plus, you know, going in, sneaking in subscriptions. I'll email everybody where it is after the show. Maybe I'll edit this part of the recording.
I won't tell anybody you told me that, but I'm going to look for it, because I had no idea that there was a season 3. Is it the same characters?
Yes, yeah, it's a continuation of the show, of the Netflix one.
But the kids are now older, so they're not kids, I guess.
Are you talking about the 1975 version, or are you talking about the new version?
Oh,
I'm talking about the version I saw. I don't know when that was done.
Was it a white family or a Hispanic family?
Oh no, Hispanic family. I don't want to watch
the new one.
Then that's a Netflix one, yeah.
If we're a white family, it would have been boring and obnoxious. The Latin family,
1979.
they were great. I just thought I really, really enjoyed it, and I recommend it to my friend Peter, and anybody else who hasn't seen it. I'm going to follow it. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you,
no problem.
Now, if anybody has any intergenerational questions, as I thought, I'm here for the time being.
Thank you. I was hoping you were going to come in with the knowledge of 1975 version, but no, I don't think any of us have seen that one.
I should actually look it up and see a few episodes.
I've seen a couple of episodes in class before, but we always studied like Maude.
I might have, but I was actually living in England in 1975.
No
And
streaming services?
And the English are really no fun. So I wouldn't have seen it.
Well, I'm out of questions. I mean, I have a few more, but I don't want to take up everyone's time. So if anyone else has any questions on the floor, or Fernando, is there anything you wanted to talk about? I'm going to open it up before.
Nothing, no specific topic from my part, but I also, if you also have a question, not just about like the show or the little talk that I did, but about my work or Accenture, I can also answer those while I'm here.
I have a quick question. One thing that occurred to me while listening to your talk was how profound the impact is of seeing yourself in media. And I think Charles touched on that beautifully. What was it like, or doesn't that indicate how important it is to see yourself also in the workplace, in leadership roles in the workplace? I mean, we can talk, you know, I was about to say none of us make media, but that's not necessarily true, but all of us are participants in the corporate world. And so this is a place where we can make an impact taking those tools that we've learned from your talk. And I wanted to give you the opportunity to talk a little bit about your work at Accenture in that capacity, because I know you've done quite a bit.
No, I think that's actually a great connection. To the first kind of part of the statement, the representation piece, and how that also translates to my job, to the corporate world, definitely has an impact. For example, just seeing, or let me backtrack, one of the global sponsors for the Pride ERG within Accenture, his name is Marco Ziegler. He's based out of here in New York. Well, technically out of the Jersey office, but he comes into this office every once in a while. So when I met him a couple of years ago, before I knew he was like the global sponsor and whatever, he was super nice, and like I met his husband, and they have 2 kids, and they had like a little event at their house and whatever. And then as the years have gone by, I've been at Accenture for 5.5 years now, and I started seeing his name in like emails and things, not just about Pride, but like Accenture as a whole. And I'm like, oh wow, like this person that I met that is like me, different background, but is also also identifies as gay and is married with a man and has children. He is like a senior MD in the company, managing director. He's a senior MD. He's like accomplished all these things and keeps accomplishing all these things. And that just gives me this sort of sense of pride, not to be, no pun intended, but pride that someone that has a similar experience to mine has been able to achieve those things. And also just, I guess, drive to have, like, to know that I can too, if I want to, both in the professional perspective and in the personal perspective. So yeah, definitely representation has a big impact in the workplace as well. In terms of like my work in Accenture with Pride, which is like kind of the second part of your question. I started in Accenture actually in Boston, and I was there for 3.5 years. But ever since I started, I think sometime in my first year, probably like towards the end of my first year, I joined the Pride ERG and I started like attending events, and eventually I got into leadership roles because since college I've always been like, oh, student groups, let me go in, let me do something else. And I have to say that being at that time I was both part of the Hispanic American ERG and the Pride ERG. And the ERGs have been the one thing within Accenture that has always like kept me loving my job. And that is not to say that there are other things, but that is one thing that from the beginning just like pulled me in. And I met incredible people that I don't see now. Like maybe I see them once a year, or we talk like a couple times a year, and they're still like close friends. And yeah, it's just the ERGs, especially the Pride and the Hispanic ERG, opened a lot of doors for me, and also have allowed me to, I guess, not only meet people, but help people feel the same way that I did at the beginning. As part of like what we do in the Pride ERG, even though COVID, the last few years, it has been a little struggle because everyone's, after a while, everyone was burned out of virtual events. But still, it was such a helpful tool to keep people connected. Before the pandemic, it was like one of the things that people looked out for, like, oh yeah, there's like a happy hour this Friday, or there's like this speaker series, or this is happening. And even through COVID, like after the initial, I'm going to say at least 6 months of lockdown in 2020, the groups, not just Pride, but the other groups also, we started trying to kind of reorganize again and like at least send out a communication so that people knew like, hey, you have these resources available if you need to talk to someone, or we're going to do this event, et cetera, et cetera. And now that we're getting back in person, the field is different. There's such an excitement because we know that we're going to be able to see all of our, we call them members just because they have to sign up in our ERG portal, but we're going to see all of our members again. We're going to be able to meet up in the office or somewhere. So my work at Accenture has mostly been just creating community, and yeah, just helping people within the Pride ERG and others, but mostly within the Pride ERG, feel connected and visible and heard. I kind of rambled there, but I hope that answered your question.
You did. I was wondering if you talked about the show and these groups within Accenture. Were there any other resources that you've been able to turn to that have been able that you've used to help you with your navigation of being at the intersection of so many identities that maybe people who were watching could also turn to, like a book or a website or a podcast or another club membership, something like that?
Well, the club memberships or like these groups, I've always just been active since I joined the company. There's like, I want to say 13, that number is stuck in my mind, but I think there's more ERGs within the company. So that's definitely one thing. Books, I can get you one or two. I actually recently finished reading Untamed by Glennon Doyle. And I got that from there's a book club here from the Women's ERG. And that was one of the recommendations a few months ago. And very good book, very motivating because you also see how the author's like ups and downs were to get to where she is. And the way that the book is written is also very interesting. Like the chapters sometimes are like half a page long or 1 page long. And then the longer ones are like maybe 5 pages. So it's really a good book to read like bit by bit, that you can read like a little bit every day or a little bit every night, and you can still kind of grasp the message. Other resources, really, I rely a lot on my friends. I have a very, as I mentioned, like my chosen family. I have a very close group of friends that we've known each other now, most of us for like about 10 years. We met in college. And one of them I've known since like 4th grade. So I definitely rely a lot on them, and we listen to each other. We like therapize each other all the time, pretty much. So I would say whatever, for anyone that's listening, like whatever people close to you that you know you can trust and you know that you can count on for anything, that should be your main resource, and then everything else kind of adds on to that. But that's been how I've handled, I don't know, the ups and downs of COVID and my personal life, etc. Like I usually go to them first, and then like, okay, what other things can I do to or use to help me out or to do whatever it is that I'm trying to do.
For anyone listening, the Baruch PRIDE Society is an excellent organization for any member of the LGBT community to join, and their lovely president is our host today.
Oh, you're on mute, Charles.
On a more serious note, I want to make sure that everyone understands also that there are resources available to you at Baruch should you be struggling with any of these experiences, navigating your intersectionality, identity, culture. The counseling center at Baruch, which the link is in the chat and Shona has just put it there again, is an incredible resource. And actually we have a very great person in that office named Gary Dillon, who's absolutely amazing, who's specifically part of the LGBT community if you're looking for someone who can speak to that specifically. He's also has run a series of safe training workshops. So there's a lot of LGBT support at Baruch, and if you need help finding it, I can put my personal email in the chat, and you can also connect to our club, and anyone from our club will be happy to help you. So while I'm doing that, is there any questions or anything that anyone has left for Fernando or anyone else in the group? Chris Cuny for the longest emails on earth, but there we go. Thank you everyone for joining us. And thank you, Fernando, for sharing with us your conversation and speech and incredible story about a show that I hope everyone will go home and watch.
Yes, watch it.
And I'm looking forward to seeing everyone on campus, and hopefully we'll be able to start having in-person events again soon. But if not, you can connect with us online. I know that the MBA Club has many events coming up. I know that the Graduate Pride Society has many events coming up. And Yoko, did you want to say something?
I was clapping my hand to say thank you.
Thank you, Yoko. And also, Yoko is a member of the Women in Business group at Zicklin. So there's another club here that for support. So there's a lot of really great ways to get involved in the community at Baruch, and I highly encourage it. There's brilliant people, and it brings you into contact with people like Fernando. So how lucky could you be? So I'll leave it at that. Fernando.
If you need resources, you can reach out to us. We'll be your resources.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much. I'll hang around a little bit. Feel free to leave.
Thank you, everyone.
And I will be here if you want to chat.